Hello and welcome back to NHB Retro. About a week and a half ago, I set out to make a video about repairing and refurbishing all of my Disk 2 drives. I had made a video previously where I added a power supply that was missing to an Apple IIe, and when I went to test that computer, I grabbed a drive off of my stack of drives, and I had to go through several before I found one that worked. So after that, I decided I would go back and fix up all of my Disk 2s, which I did. And I filmed a lot of pieces and parts of me variously addressing the issues with the drives. Unfortunately, that video, that footage came out very just sporadic, and it was hard for me to create any kind of narrative or be very clear in any kind of instruction as to how I addressed the specific problems that I had with my drives. So what I'd like to do, in lieu of putting out that very scattered video, I'm just going to go through and give you sort of an after-action report and be a little clearer, I think, about the issues I had to address and what I had to do with them. So let me set this back up. We'll take one of the drives apart and I'll go through some of the common problems that I addressed, and then I'll go on to some of the less common ones, because like I said, the actual issues with the drives were various. Some of them were a little bit unexpected. So yeah, let me set that up and I'll bring you back. All right, let's start by just examining and disassembling a Disk 2 drive. So this one, I think, is one of the ones of mine that actually was either working or very close to working. This drive, I think, is in very good shape. But let's take it apart and let's just examine the parts and pieces inside and talk a little bit about what kind of things can go wrong. So this outer case is just held on by 4 screws. Yeah, one of the first signs of how one of these drives might look on the inside is the screws. These are nice and shiny and black. A few of them were rusted and corroded, which gives you some indication right away of what kind of conditions the drive was stored in. Okay, so with the screws out, these slide off pretty relatively easily. Sometimes it will fight you. We've got basically some sticker material in here that blocks off these fake vents. Sometimes this, if there's a little bit of a gap here, that can catch, and these can be difficult to get off. But yeah, basically, they slide right off. Okay, so now we have the drive itself. I'm going to go ahead and take off this lower portion as well, the lower portion of the case. If you are just going to be recapping the analog board, which we'll get to in a second here, then this step is not strictly necessary, but it does let you get a little bit better view of the drive and access to the drive motor control board, which is at the back of the drive. We'll look at that in just a bit here. These drives, the ones from Apple, they were originally Shugart, made by Shugart Associates. I think all the ones I have are made by Shugart Associates. I know that they eventually went to different distributors, etc. And of course, other makes might have different ones as well. Oh, okay. So yeah, this cable system here is just, it's got a clip, retains the cable to the back of the case, and it just basically slides out. And once you've done that, the entire case is free. Okay, so yeah, this drive is in very nice shape. As you can see, there's really no dirt or anything under here. It's really nice shape, in fact. So let's look at the other parts here. The top portion here, we have this is the analog board. This is what actually interfaces to the computer directly via the ribbon cable. And this is a common part that needs to be addressed if you're having issues. It has 3 electrolytic capacitors on here. When you talk about recapping one of these drives, this portion of it, those are the 3 caps that need to be replaced. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this backboard. This is the motor controller board, I believe. This board, the top board, is made by Apple, supplied by Apple. I believe these are actually supplied with the drive by Shugart. This control board, again, we'll talk about these a little bit more in depth in just a moment here, but commonly there are 3 capacitors here, and these also, of course, if you're having issues with the drive, those commonly are replaced in a recapping. So let me go ahead and take this control board off the top. This one has a nice clip holding the cable in, and it's got its ferrite cores here. They don't all have this, especially if someone's worked on them, because this clip can be very easily taken off, set aside, and lost. But it's nice to have. All right, cable removed. Now, this is where I start giving a little bit of an after-action report on some of the drives that I addressed. One of the drives that I had, when it was connected to the computer, if you power cycled the computer, it wouldn't even beep or come on or anything, no display. And with the drive disconnected, the computer booted fine. And that turned out to be an issue with the cable, where there had been some cable damage. These are often mistreated, especially if it's in a salvage type operation where they'll just kind of rip the drive out. That is what had happened to that drive. And the end actually had a short. So I think I was actually quite lucky I didn't damage the Apple. And I was able to address that by just making a new cable. I'll talk a little bit more about that as well. So anyway, cable out. And let's go ahead and remove this the rest of the way. Now, this connector at the bottom, excuse my reach, is held on by some clips that go, they sort of hook into little retaining holes in the board from the top and the bottom. So these can be slightly difficult to remove. I find if you just have a pointy tool, you can sort of pry it up from this side and push down at the same time. A little bit difficult to do on camera here, but then you can get this to release and you sort of just walk it off. And same for the other side. Again, this is a little bit awkward to do on camera. Yeah. Let me see if I can just, there we go. Yeah, generally those pull right off. I tend to apply some deoxit, of course, just like everything else. Okay, and this is the connector that connects back to the motor controller. So this just slides off. It's obviously it's a keyed connection, so you can't put it on wrong. And now the board is just retained by 2 screws. Let's go ahead and take those off. Keep track of the screws. All of them, of course, all the various screws are different sizes. Luckily, the counts make it pretty easy to figure out which ones are which. Okay, so now the board you just slide it forward out of these retainers at the back, and it comes right off. Now, I have several extra spare, known good working analog boards. That was a really important feature for me figuring out troubleshooting these drives. If I had one that mechanically didn't have any obvious problems, which some of them did, if I had one that basically didn't seek or had other issues like that, but otherwise seemed fine, I would just swap out the controller board. And if it worked with the new controller board, then I would start looking at this. First, I would recap it, which I did. I believe not this one. No, this one was in really good shape. This is a very late one. Anyway, start by recapping this, examine and make sure all the chips are seated. I did have one where some moisture had apparently gotten into the drive, and this chip in particular, the ULN 2003, which is a little array of Darlington transistors, I believe, had obvious corrosion on the legs. The socket seemed fine, but the chip itself had corrosion. I did attempt to address that just by cleaning the legs, but they were pretty heavily corroded, and that chip just was not good. In fact, one of the pins completely just fell off while I was very gently cleaning it. So, yeah, it's nice to have spares of these in the troubleshooting process. Again, it's usually going to be these three resistors, though, or these three capacitors that are giving you the trouble. And the commonly available capacitor kits, for instance, the one from Console 5, obviously have those three in there. Incidentally, if you have a Franklin controller card, you'll be shocked to learn that they're electrically equivalent, and you can just substitute a Franklin controller card for this testing. The only major difference is that the connector is over on the other side, so installing it in the actual case would be a slightly problematic, but yeah, very nice for some quick troubleshooting there. Okay, let's look a little bit at the mechanical stuff. So I did have some drives. Two of my drives had interesting mechanical issues. One of them, when I went to power up the drive, you could hear that it wasn't spinning. The head was seeking, it was not spinning. And when I went in here and just physically tried to turn the spindle a little bit, it was obviously stuck. I ended up lubricating that. There is a bearing in there, etc., and that is just frozen up. I lubricated it. I spun it by hand a bit, and that drive came right back. Now another, let me see. I think I'll just take this. This portion of the drive isn't necessarily usually to take off, but let's go ahead and do it. Yeah, this one obviously has never been off. Breaking the seals. These screws literally have a little thread locker applied to the top of them. Very long screws. Not really. Oh boy, that was... Yeah, this thread locking substance was very effective, obviously. Okay, get that out of there. Okay, with those two screws out, this is actually the spring mechanism that makes the door spring open. With those screws out, you can just very carefully slide the whole thing off. Now, this is obviously the top portion of the spindle. This is what comes down and contacts the center ring of the disc, and in conjunction with this bottom part, clamps it. So this part moves down. This bottom spindle portion is stationary in that it does not move up and down. But yeah, that clamps the disc, and then the motor spins, and that's what makes the disc go around. One of the drives I had, you can see that this spindle here, it's just pressed onto a bearing shaft. And it's flush. You can see the top of the bearing shaft and the bottom of this hub are flush. And there's a little bit of dust in there too. One of mine, maybe it had been dropped or something, and since this is just pressed on, it had moved and it was not flush. The hub was extended a little bit, and you could see that it just needed to be pushed back down. The symptom of that was that if I tried to put in a floppy, the leading edge of the floppy would hit the edge of this hub, and you could not insert a floppy. All I had to do was take this off. I completely removed the hub and applied a small amount of lubrication to the bearing underneath, which is something I commonly do, and just pressed this back in place until it was flush. And that fixed that drive. Incidentally, while you're in here, it's a good idea to grease these rails. If you want to clean the head by hand, you can have good access to it here. I typically use just a cleaning floppy. And yeah, so that basically is the extent of the mechanical issues that I ran into with these drives. Obviously, the belt is something that needs to be in good shape. Kits for that are commonly available. I believe Console 5 has them. None of my drives that I had needed a new belt. Okay, so let's go on and talk a little bit more about the drive control board at the back. And for that, I want to grab another drive just to show you some of the variety that you might run into, which I did not expect. Okay, here I've taken the case off another one of the drives to demonstrate an issue that I ran into that I wasn't expecting, but probably is very well known to people that are used to this kind of drive. On the left over here, we have the drive that we were just looking at. This is, like I said, this is one that just worked right out of the box. It's super clean. It looks like a much later drive than some of the rest of them. Over here is one that ironically was one of the worst ones I had. It had significant corrosion and other issues with it. But one of the things that I ran into right away and noticed was the difference in these motor controller boards. And I'll try to give you a closer up view. This here again, we have the what is probably the standard one. And if you buy a recapping kit, it will come with these 3 capacitors. And over here on the right, we have just a different one. Again, I think this is an actual official board because 2 out of the 5 drives that I had this style of controller board. You'll notice it only has this one really obvious electrolytic capacitor here, which does not come with most of the kits that I've seen, or certainly not the ones that I have, though it's easily replaced and sourced. But yeah, that's a difference you might run into. I don't know the exact provenance of those. I mean, the drive itself, it has a actual Shugart Associates sticker on it. There are other visual differences between the 2 drives. This style of motor here. This one has, some of the wires are on an actual connector that you can pull off, though some are still soldered. Whereas on this one, all the connectors are soldered, for whatever difference that makes. Again, here's this again is a later one, but very different style of motors and motor controllers. So yeah, something I ran into. Incidentally, just as a comparison, I took apart several of the Franklin drives that I have, and they were all this style. I don't know what that means, if this is an earlier one, later one, whatever. Anyway, a point of interest. Yeah, so this drive in particular, like I said, this was one of the worst ones. It had a lot of corrosion. You can still see a little bit of the corrosion that didn't really come off very well on some of the screws. This board, the corrosion had actually affected this chip, and I needed to replace that chip. I also recapped this board, though I didn't replace this capacitor, and now this one works fine. It also had a cable issue. Let me set up again, and I will show you some of the issues and points about the cables. Okay, let's talk cables. This was another issue I ran into with one of the drives. This drive, in fact. This is the cable that came with it. When I got it, one of these connectors had been just rather rudely ripped off. It was halfway hanging off the cable. I removed it the rest of the way and trimmed the cable and reinstalled it. However, after doing that, I realized this cable has a short in it. So when I connected this to the computer, not only did the drive not come on in any way or work, the computer itself did not boot when this was connected to it. So that was a bad short in this cable. So to address that, I simply removed this cable. This may be fixable, but for now I'm just gonna, I just made a new one. And this is the new one that I made. It has this sort of rainbow colored ribbon to it, which is similar to the older Apple II cables that they use. This is a newer style. It has more shielding. It has a grounding tab here, etc. I really like the way these old ones looked, so I went with this. I transferred the ferrite cores onto here, which incidentally, every time I see these ferrite cores, I think what a massive in size, as in physical size, set of core memory you could make with some of those. Anyway, yeah, so I made this cable and attached it to the drive. Now, I made the cable. How do you make the cable? Well, this is a 20 conductor flat ribbon cable, a standard, and these connectors are 20 pin IDC. I believe they're called IDC. They're 2-row connectors, 10 by 10, right? So 20 in total. And if you're not familiar with these are actually pretty easy to make, to install. You just, you can buy a whole box of the connectors. I got that off of Amazon, I believe, but they're available in many other places. And this is the way that they come. The connectors look like this. You can kind of open them up a little bit more than they are. And you sort of slide the cable in there, and you can see there are rows of kind of sharp, almost like knives in there. And when you put the cable in and then clamp this, apply a clamping force here, those rows of teeth actually penetrate the cable, establish the connections, and you get your, hopefully if you do everything right, you get your 20 pin connector on the side. These need to be installed in the correct way. On the board, it is important that this connector is facing this way. I don't think you could actually get it installed the other way, but always remember the cable is facing up towards you. Is how it comes off of here. And then and you want to make sure, using, since these are strongly color coded, you can figure out quite easily which side is which. And on the drive side, you want this to go down, or on the controller side rather. Let me grab a controller real quick here. Just demonstrate that. So on the controller, of course, and I've heard of people doing this backwards, and I don't frankly see how you could do that, but you want to make sure it's installed this way with the cable facing out, away from the card. If you do it this way somehow, and you'd really have to try to get it in there, apparently that is bad, and you can cause damage to your equipment if you do it that way. So always be careful about the orientation of the cable. In any case, replacing the cable on this drive actually got it to the point where the computer would power up again. The short was gone, so that was a success. All right, I think that pretty much wraps up the actual issues that I had with the drives themselves, other than cleaning the heads and lubricating the rails and the hub, etc. That was it. All of my drives came back and now worked. So then the last thing I needed to do was install them in a computer and set the speed as appropriate. Now you can see on the bottom of these, they have this wheel with the 50 and 60 hertz test patterns, and I guess you could look at that. On the sides of these drives is a little potentiometer. You can see on this drive, it's this part right here sticking out, and it has a little, it's an adjustable potentiometer, adjustable with a small screwdriver. So let me get this drive set up onto a computer, and we will test and set the speed. Alrighty, final step. This is one of the drives that was restored. Pardon me for the shadow and the lighting. One of the drives that I recapped and made a new cable for this one, obviously. Cleaned the heads, lubricated the rails, etc. Final step is to set the speed. So I've got a blank floppy in there already. I'm using copy 2 plus. I'm gonna go verify. I'm gonna go drive speed. Yep, that's the right one. Just trying to make sure I'm not. Yep, okay. Okay, and we can see this one is running just a little teeny bit fast. So we go to the adjustment screw here, and these are pretty, I go very slow when I'm doing these. I want to get it real close to 200. Got to kind of sneak up on it, wait for the sort of lag. Okay, that looks pretty good. All right, I'm gonna repeat that for all the drives, reassemble, and we should be in pretty good shape. I'll come back for a recap in just a bit. Here's another point, very important point, which I wasn't even gonna include in this video, but it's something to consider when you're working on these old drives. And that is, and this is rather obvious, but you know, it might not be obvious in the moment, discs go bad. Especially if you're out here in the garage working around them with, you know, things that are magnetic. You can easily mess up a disc. So this reared its ugly head when I was putting this particular drive back together. I took my trusty copy of Copy 2 Plus 9.1 that I had been using on all the drives, and I went to boot it to make sure that the drive was still working, and sure enough, it starts booting, but then right there, it's not going to boot now. And I thought, oh my goodness, I've messed up the drive somehow. So I checked the cable, I checked the controller card, I swapped in some other controller cards, analog boards, and it didn't. And then it occurred to me, of course, that hey, maybe this disc is not working. So yeah, I chose another one. In this case, the Apple IIe Diagnostics, and of course it boots right up. And I tried it with a few other discs, and they all seem to work as well. So that's something to keep in mind. Make sure your disk medium is good and readable, and don't assume that it's still good and readable after you've messed with it for a while. You know, it's sad that diskettes aren't really as reliable even as they used to be, and they're always, of course, vulnerable to magnetic damage. So yeah, that's just a good note to keep in mind when you're working on your disk drives. And just like that, all of my Apple II 5 1/4 inch drives are serviced and working. Oh, okay. Well, not all of my Apple II disk drives, but all the Apple branded. Okay. So clearly I have some more work to do coming up. And clearly I have a problem. But anyway, all of my disk 2s certainly uh, speak now. Yeah, all of my disk 2s are actually serviced, working, and usable to test out various computers as I get them up and running. So hopefully you enjoyed this. Hopefully it wasn't too chaotic. Hopefully there's some good information in there. If I glossed over anything, if you have any questions, I'm always very happy to answer questions in the comments. Or if I got something wrong, please tell me. This is a learning journey for me and hopefully for you as well. All right, with that, thanks again, and I will catch you on the next one. Нет, дорогие, не нет.